Hello and welcome to the June 2021 block of the month. And this month we're going to be working on the border that kind of goes around our medallion center area. So this is going to be using up the rest of our strips. We are going to not be using foundation for this, whether you chose a used dryer sheet or paper or whatever your foundation was. We are done with those. You can, if you enjoy doing it that way, you're more than welcome to go ahead and use them. But since we are going to be sewing our strips in pieces where the straight of grain is going to be, we're sewing them so that there's no bias. And then the foundation, what that does is keep all the bias edges from stretching out of place and getting larger or kind of misshapen. So without using the foundation, our pieces are going to be just fine because they're not cut on the bias. They're just with the fabric strip pieces. So the first thing that you have to do is decide on your placement. And so if you've chosen to do 5 colors in your quilt, you can mix all your colors up and just pick a random strip and just start sewing in them together. What I'm going to do with mine, I have 3 main colors in my quilt. And so I have decided to do 3 strips of the aqua, 3 strips of the gold yellow color, and then 3 strips of gray. And I'm just going to repeat that all the way around the border. So that's probably the hardest decision, is just deciding how you want to go ahead and place out your strips. Now, another suggestion would be if I had 12 fabrics that were aqua, I could put all 12 and maybe go light to dark, and then go ahead and add the gold, light to dark with all my gold strips. But I'm just going to kind of use from the scraps I already have cut. I have used some of my fabrics up already because I just started with a small amount. So I don't want to try to, use every single one in an order and have that be, throughout the whole border. So this way, I'm just going to pick whatever fabrics are handy and sew those together. So I do like scrappy quilts, so I save all my pieces. And so these are just a variety that I had from my board. So as I cut my strips, I just place them all on a cookie sheet that I wasn't using. So it just kind of keeps them all in one place, kind of orderly. And another thing I did is anything that got really small, like let's say 5 inches or less, I put them in here. And so I have lots of little pieces that I could have thrown them away, but I tend to keep anything larger than 1 inch square. So if it's bigger than 1 inch, I will keep it and try to use it up. I love working with little pieces and putting a bunch of little pieces together, and then, having it grow and have colorful little bits all throughout the quilt. So I do keep all my little pieces, and I have those just on this tray so that when I needed a small piece, I could come here first, and then my longer strips were on the cookie sheet. So that may help you, may not, but I can kind of show you how I'm going to work with those as well. So I'm going to start with my larger strips, and I'm going to kind of just go through, and I know right now I have my golds, and so some of them are the width of the fat quarter that I started with. Some of them are like width of fabric, and then I cut them in half, and then, if I've already used some, I've cut them off. So right now I'm just going to kind of put them in groups of 3 so that they're kind of the same length. And I'm going to start with those pieces. Okay, so these 3 right here are pretty much the same length. And so that'll be easy to sew those 3 together in a strip set. Okay, so I'm going to do that one. And then I have a few left, and so I'm just going to kind of just place those here. These 3 happen to have salvages, so I'm just putting my salvages at one end. We're going to cut them all down and kind of square them up as we go. So I don't really care about which order they're in, light, dark. I just want sets of 3 per color. So I'll sew these 3 together, and then I'll show you a little bit how I worked with some of the little scraps that I had. So, all right, what I'm looking for is, I know that we're going to have a border that measures a certain height all the way around. So I just want to find pieces that when I put them together are going to be larger than the height that I need, because I'm going to go through and trim them all down to exactly the right size. But I do want to make sure that at least I can trim off both edges and square them up good. Now these two happen to be the same size, and I like the way that that looks, so I'm just going to build little piles of pieces that I can sew together. Now this one is longer than what I'm going to need for when I cut down my my strip sets, so I'm not going to sew anything to this. I know I can use this as is, so I'm going to kind of place it on another pile so I know that that's the size I'm going to be needing. And then I'm just going to kind of play around and find, you know, things that I like together. Like those two look good together, so that'll be another set. And then I'm just going to kind of make a little pile here and alternate them, so when I get to the sewing machine I can just kind of pick one up and sew those together. So again, I know this one is longer than what I need, so I'm going to add that to a pile over here. And right now, like I said, I'm just matching up like size where my strips are the same width, but I also want to use them where they're not the same width. So you can see here, these two, this one's much wider than this, but I can trim that down. So I do want to put those two together. So I've got a few pieces here, and I want to work with those and make smaller pieces together to make it longer than what I'm going to need. And then I will sew that into strip sets and then trim it down to the size I need. So let's work on some of that, and we'll get some of these sewn together. Okay, now that we're at the sewing machine, I'm going to start sewing these little pieces together. And these two here are not the same width, but I'm still going to use them. So I'm just going to kind of line up. I am going to pick an edge to kind of start with and line them up there. And then this one just overhangs because it is longer, but that's fine. And I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm just going to chain piece these little bits and make some longer strips. And this is, you know, an optional step. Like I said, I have little pieces left. I really like using all my scraps. I don't mind working with little pieces, and so I enjoy this. But if this is not something that you're wanting to do, then you certainly don't have to. It's just another design variation that you can add in your quilt. And we got one more here. And I just kind of line up the edges, the long sides here. And then they're not, I didn't rotary cut these. I just scissor cut them off when I, you know, finish sewing them onto my dryer sheets. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. If you want it straight, you can go ahead and, you know, just add a ruler and rotary cutter and straighten it up. But I'm okay with just going ahead and kind of eyeballing it. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart. All right, and then we can press those in a bit. But while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and sew together a longer strip set. And again, I have my salvages at one end here, so I'm just going to line those up and just making sure my edges here meet up. And then I'm going to do a 1/4 inch. And you can pin if you want. I just kind of line them up as I go. I have decreased my stitch length. I like a tiny stitch length, but it's up to you. But when we are making strip sets and we're going to come back and subcut these, where we're cutting, your stitches may pop open a little bit at the very, at the edges where we've cut. So it is a good idea to just shorten them if you are going to do any, trim down work. So go ahead and adjust your stitch length so that it's much smaller. And my strips weren't the same length. I'm just going to stop stitching where my shortest strip ends. And then I can cut this off and use this in another piece to sew it together. I just keep using my scraps over and over and over and over again. So, but again, that is a personal preference and you can choose to use them or not. But on this side, I am lining up all the selvages and trying to start off with a little bit, of a straight edge here, trying to kind of keep them lined up. And you may choose to press your strips after each one. I like to add a few and then go ahead and press them. It's just whatever works easiest for you. Okay, and I knew that that shorter one was underneath there, so I just stopped when I got to that point. But okay, let's go ahead and press these. Okay, I'm at my pressing station, and I'm going to go ahead first and I do like to set my seams first. So with my hot iron, I'm just going to touch it over where I've already sewn my seams. Okay, and then with my fingers, I'm going to kind of just fold it back where I feel like I don't have any little pleats in there. It's all nice and flat. And I'm just working on these two fabrics right now. And so I'm pulling it with my finger that's going in front of the iron here. And just making sure it's all nice and flat. Okay, and it really doesn't matter on these which way you're pressing. You can press them to the outside, you can press them to the middle piece. It really doesn't matter. It's just whatever works easiest for you. Okay, and again, I'm just rolling that out flat with my fingers and then pressing it with my iron. And then you can add a bit of best press or a little bit of starch or water. I don't use steam in my iron, so sometimes I just mist it with a little bit of water, and that just kind of helps keep it in shape there. But that's how we're going to do our strip set. So I'll set that one aside, and then these little bits, I'm going to go ahead and just again kind of set my seam, pull one back. I can tell it's nice and flat. And then just give those a little press to one side. And then this one here, they're not quite even, so I know that I have to trim these up, so I'm going to put those on another pile so I can come back and do that. And this one here is also going to need to be trimmed up, so. Okay. Little press, Add that to that pile, and we'll go trim these up, cut our strip sets apart, and just keep going on with the process. Okay, we're back at the cutting table, and I am going to cut my strips apart now, or subcut them into the border width that I'm going to need. So this here is one of those little pieces where I put two together, and one's a little bit longer. So I'm just going to put a ruler on there and kind of line it up with a line on the ruler matching the seam where I've joined them. And I'm kind of lining it up over here. I might just be taking just a sliver off, but just straightening it up so that they now are the same width. And then that just makes it easier to join to another one. And so I'll do the same thing with this one here. Just putting a line on the ruler over that seam. Trim a little bit off just so that they're the same width. Now these here I haven't pressed, and I just kind of eyeballed them when I was sewing them. I didn't have a straight edge, but I know that my seam is straight. So I'm going to line my ruler up on my stitching line and then just give it a trim before I press it. And that's just another way of, you know, getting a straight edge so that they're the same width when you use them. So a couple different options for doing those. Okay, and then here's another strip that I have. This is just a small section here that I've sewn together. And so we're going to cut this into the width that I need. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim on the edge where I tried to line them up. And what I'm going to do is just, again, put a line from my ruler over one of the stitching lines, the seams where they're joined. And I'm using that to make a straight edge. And then I'm just going to cut off a little bit here so that they are straight on that end. And then I'm going to place my ruler on there, the width that I need it to be. I'm going to, again, line up a line here, line up my line at the edge, and cut it off. And I'm just going to keep going down my strip set. Now, if it's too small to use to get to the size that I need it to be, again, I don't like to throw anything away, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut this into smaller segments of any width, and then I'm going to sew more to it to make another strip, and I'll just keep doing that until I have pieces that are just too small to use. So again, this is just a personal preference. I just like the visual effect that it gives with all the different little variations inside. So now this I'll just add to my strip pile. I'll add more to it and then be able to use that as a section. So here I have done that. I have a solid piece here, and then these are two that I've pieced together. So I'm just going to pick an end and, well, cut off the salvage, make sure I got all my salvage in there. I'm going to trim that side and then line it up this side with my edge, pick a line on the ruler and line it up with one of the straight edges there and trim that off. Now I could cut this down, but here it's less than an inch, and that's kind of where I draw the line. I don't want to work with anything that's less than an inch. So I will go ahead and just toss this. Now, I could take this apart and then use that little piece, but I'm okay throwing that much away. So we'll toss that. And then now this piece is ready to be joined to my next. So what I have decided to do is to go 3 of each color and just join them. So this is, now I'm going to add these 3 together, and then I have a section of my border, and then I'm going to just keep building smaller sections and adding them to it until it is the length that I need it to be. And so I'm going to sew those together. And then here is a longer strip set that I'm going to cut down, and I'll just kind of show you how you can work with that. Again, the side that you kind of started with to line them up is where I'm going to square it off, and then I'll flip my strip set and then pick a line on my ruler to put over one of the seams and just trim that off. And then that'll be like the next section that I add on. And then I'll just keep cutting this smaller and smaller until I've used up all of this piece. And just kind of watch. If I cut, you know, if my cutting gets off a little bit, I can square it up and kind of start again. But so far it's kind of staying straight and looking okay. So, all right, and this little bit I'm gonna square up here, and then I will be able to, you know, add more to that and keep using that. So, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and sew some of these together and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, now I've got my little sections and I'm gonna just start adding those together, and I'm gonna just keep doing it in the order that I decided to use my colors in. So I'm gonna go aqua gold gray. And then I'm just gonna sew a bunch together and then go press then. So I'm just lining up my edges, and you can pin this if it's easier for you. And just a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, like this. And then I've got one done here. So now I'm just gonna start adding those together and then making it longer and longer and longer. Okay. Okay, and it's just going to keep growing and getting longer and longer, and I'll just make it the length that I need to go ahead and add it to my the center of my quilt to add as the border. Now what you can do, I made mine into just 3-piece strip units, and I'm right now just using up the little bits of scraps kind of that I had left over, but I am just about out of the longer strips, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a few more strips. Then I'll have all the same length, and then I may go ahead and make a large strip piece set that is all 9 colors or fabrics, and then subcut that, and then this section would already be done, then I just add it on. I do like to work it with their a little bit smaller number of fabrics in my strip set. That just gives me a little bit more variety in my placement, and also it's just a little bit easier to work with. So whatever works best for you, but have fun with it and just keep sewing.